Welcome back, all you Fabricans and Fleshbags, to the super, not funny show reviews. I am Mole Poupe, your resident fabricant and comment extraordinaire on all things pop culture, and I'm joined by the anime expert, video game designer, and lover of all things superhero, and that's my good friend LADI. And together, we're going to be doing a review of the long-awaited sci-fi epic coming to you from Warner Brothers, filled with sand and worms and all sorts of sci-fi shenanigans. That, of course, is Dune. Dune, based on the classic sci-fi novel from Frank Herbert. This is I guess you'd say, a high-budget imagining of this, coming to you from director Denis Villeneuve, starring Timothy Chalamet, uh, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, David Desmalchin, Stellan Skarsgård, Jason Momoa, and and we could go on and on and on. Just a big, huge cast, a big, huge movie that's so far seems to be making a big, huge impact. But what did we really think about it? That's what we're here to do, to talk about. So, Lottie, thanks for joining me for this review, this recap, if you will, and just man, first of all, did you know anything about this before? Before you saw this movie.
See, I know of Dune. So I had to explain this to a lot of my friends because they were like, "Oh, is this just another Star Wars ripoff?" And I'm like, "It's not a Star Wars ripoff. All
First,
these books came out around the same time.
wait, I
Dune,
just want to say, how dare your friends? In
yeah,
fact,
because
all any of you listening, how dare you? The first Dune came out in 1965. So,
yeah,
if anything, Star Wars is a ripoff
it's a
of
ripoff of it.
Dune.
Actually, yeah. To be honest with you, I mean, that's what I was like trying to tell them. Like I told him, sci-fi was real big in the '60s and the '70s, and a lot of these books came out around the same time. Dune, Star Wars, Ender's Game, Star Trek. I said all this stuff came out around the same time, so it's not really copying. There's actually another one I can't even think of. They're not really copying each other. They just all share sort of the same idea. This is why like the '90s, early 2000s was epic fantasy. They all share around the same concepts. And like that's what I was telling them, and I was like, guys, it's just like I didn't know much about Dune. I mean, I don't know Dune as in I never read the book, but I know how huge of a story it is. And I am a most people don't notice, I am a sci-fi junkie. I love sci-fi. Even though I'm not that much of a Star Wars fan, I love sci-fi. I am a killer for sci-fi. And I've been craving a good sci-fi movie for years, and I was like, "Cope, let this be a good movie." And I was like, "Okay," I was excited to watch it.
Right. So, yeah, it's a classic, one of the classics of sci-fi, considered to be not unfilmable, but hard to really come across faithful to the original material. It is not the first version. There was a version in 1984 by David Lynch, and of course was the Sci-Fi Channel did a couple of miniseries for the first uh, two books of three books, in fact, of the Dune series. So, but we want to talk about was it good? Did it work? So, but first, Lottie, what exactly is Dune about anyway? What's this movie about?
Okay, to basically dumb it down for some people, imagine Mad Max and Star Wars had a baby, or if Mad Max and Star Wars were the babies of Dune. That is how I will explain the story. It is basically sort of like how we have these how it's supposed to be like this sort of thing with Jedi's, but there's something else. I can't remember the name. But instead of using force, they have, I guess, the voice, you know?
Right.
And is they use this as they have their own different abilities, and it's sort of like I'm guessing from what I've seen there are competing houses because they're all underneath this supreme, I guess, universal or galactic warlord or emperor, and they all follow his orders. But underneath those orders, these houses fight each other. And I guess the main the main character's house is supposed to be quote unquote the good house, and the other house that we see in the beginning and through the trailers, the ones with the like gray skin, they're supposed to be the ruthless house,
Right.
and they're all competing for this planet, which is a dust bowl. And you're just wondering, like, why would they want this dust bowl? It's because they have this thing, and they have this thing on it, which is spice.
Yep, they got
And
drugs. It's drugs.
it's literally like I'm like no joke, listeners. It is literally space spice.
That is
It is spice
it's
in
like that is
space.
drug. That is drugs. Look, boys and girls, that is drugs.
It's so hilarious that I was like, okay, is this like cooking spice or like something? But it's actual space spice. I was like, what the?
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean, like it's essential. Like if you look at the gist of it being, there's the Atreides. They're the so-called good guys. They're the main characters. There's the Harkonnens who are the bad guys, and then there's the Emperor who's, he's pulling some shenanigans
yeah,
on here, and the Atreides have to go take over the planet of Dune, the only place you can get spice, and spice is like oil and drugs and like medicine all tied into one thing, and it's the only place you can get it, but it's all a setup, and they know it's a setup going in, and so you get this big sweeping tale of intrigue and violence and mysticism and all this other stuff, blending together on this one planet that's the harshest planet in the human universe, where there are desert people who are brutal and live brutal lives, and then so you get all of this stuff going on, and it's all centered around this one guy named Paul Atreides, who's somehow he's like Neo or something like that. He's like the one. He's the prophesied one, and he's just kind of coming
space
into his power.
Jesus.
Yeah, he is very, yeah, very astutely said he's a messiah figure, and he's coming into
Yeah.
his powers. And so this is Dune Part One, which is basically the first part of the first book, first half of the first book, where they're following all of the machinations and the harrowing adventures and stuff, and that's basically it, without going into more spoilers about it. So, Lottie, so
Mhm.
what was your overall impressions of it? What do you think about this movie in general? Would you recommend it?
So I'm gonna say this. At first, I won't say I wasn't getting into it. It took me a while to understand what was going on because I never read the Dune stories. And I'm not here to say that it's made you feel like you have to read the story. It's that they you have to pay attention watching this movie. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually a pretty good thing. That's not a bad thing. And I like that they did this because it showed stuff in the beginning of the story that plays into later on in the story. And I am a sucker for foreshadowing. Sucker for foreshadowing. And I really enjoyed this movie, honestly. Like, to me, it's one of the best sci-fi. I told my friends, this is one of the best sci-fi movies I've seen in years. Like, honestly, like, it wasn't cheesy, like how most sci-fi movies I feel that are coming out now, they're cheesy. This was not cheesy whatsoever. I'm gonna be honest with you. This felt more like I was watching a series instead of a movie. Like, I felt like there was nothing skipped. Even though I never read the books, I felt like they didn't rush anything. You know what I mean? It felt like the exposition, the setting, the plot, the climax, and the rising action, the climax, and the falling action to the resolution of the end of the movie. none of it felt rushed. Like when I went into the movie, I was like, damn, man, this movie's 2.5 hours long. God. Then after sitting there, I'm like, man, that movie was only 2.5 hours long. You know, it actually went by like it was a great. I'm talking about the whole presentation was just spectacular, and I would recommend this movie, especially if you're a sci-fi sucker. Oh man, it's a great movie, and like I said, it's not cheesy whatsoever. It has no cheese in it at all. It is really good. The actors, there was nothing like where I was like, honestly, and another thing I like also about this movie, there was nothing cringy. Another thing that kind of like sci-fi movies for some reason kind of lean into, there was no cringe. You know what I mean? It was just a great movie all the way through.
Yeah. Well, as a the person that is well versed in Dune, I've read the main series many times over, or listened to it on audiobooks many times over since I was a teenager. And I've watched the other versions of Dune, so I know what's going on. So for me, this wasn't about learning something new. This was about seeing uh, Denis Villeneuve's his vision come to life, especially with a big budget and the current special effects that are possible. And in my mind, it's a triumph, an absolute triumph. It is probably the best movie. I think it's the best movie that Denis Villeneuve has made. It's a visually stunning movie. It's a movie. I know you hear people say this, but my God, if you can see it in IMAX or Dolby Vision, if you can see it in the biggest possible theater with the best sound, it is. I mean, it changes the whole thing. I've watched it on HBO and I've watched it in the theater. It's. I feel like it's night and day. Um.
Yeah, I was
eh,
getting a lot of miles out of my damn
yeah. If you have
what's
surround sound,
my
yeah,
surround sound speakers. I was getting some miles out of that
yeah.
thing.
If you have some surround sound, especially if it's Dolby DTS, I mean, it's gonna work your system. Um. From start to finish, a fully realized vision. I everything looks real, and
Yeah,
it all
yeah,
feels real. There's a depth to this movie that is hard to explain, but it's not in just the visuals and the sound, but it's also in the way the performances are carried through. That you can, I think you can follow this story once you really get into it. And like you said, you have to pay attention. This is thinking sci-fi. This isn't pew pew, spaceships flying around each other sci-fi. This is, thought provoking. There's religion and philosophy buried in there. Talks about predestination. There's a brutal landscape that produces brutal people who do brutal things,
yep,
and the whole, it's very because the story itself, the source material, it's very Shakespearean, and the whole intrigue between houses and everything. So there's a lot of story going on. There's a lot of quiet moments that don't feel like they're just pausing just to pause. Everything feels very deliberate in this movie, and it's all building up towards that, the climax, towards the end of, at the very end, where you see essentially Paul, embrace his, what he sees as his destiny, and embrace, becoming, becoming the man that he's sort of maybe has seen in his visions, or maybe fears that he might be.
yep.
And all with all of that, it's just a gigantic epic story. If you ever want epic sci-fi, this is it. If you ever, people were talking about this is like Game of Thrones in space, and I'm like, yeah, Game of Thrones took its cues from this. You know what I'm saying? Like this is the granddaddy that we've
Hmm.
only ever sort of seen. You ever see someone, you ever meet someone, or their family members, and like, wow, they all have a strong resemblance. And then you actually meet the father or grandfather or great grandfather that they get that resemblance from, and you're like, oh, that's where all that comes from. That's this
Yep.
story. If you feel like you've seen this before, it's because all these other stories have gotten it from here. And Absolutely loved it. I immediately said, I've got to watch this again. I've got to see this again
Hmm.
because it is a master class in cinema and in story and world building. And Denis Villeneuve hit it out the park. So I say absolutely go see it. Go see it on the biggest screen you can see. And if it's the biggest screen you see is your TV at home, do that too because you will not be disappointed. Um, so that's our general impressions. We are going to do some spoilery talk here, just just to understand. So if you want to keep on going, but we are going to get into like some of the more specific things. Like, let's talk visuals. My God, what a beautiful movie! What an absolutely beautiful movie. I
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of CG in this movie. There's no denying that there's CG, but holy shit, does it look seamless?
Yeah, it's like how you just said. That's probably one of the things I couldn't get out properly in my because that's one of the things I like with sci-fi. When I say it's kind of like there's cringe moments where they try so hard to make the movie feel sci-fi that they have people obviously in costumes. You know what I mean? And it just it feels almost a little cringy. But this movie, not once did I feel like anything was really like fake. You know what I mean? I believed I was. That's why I said it felt more like I was watching a series, and I mean a series as in not that I was watching a TV show. It's sort of like if the book literally came to life and I was watching it. That's what it felt like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this I think you could see a lot. Like this budget was it's 165 million, and I think you saw not a dollar wasted. Not
No.
as visually, not a dollar wasted. The contrasting, because they went to several different planets, and just the contrast in the different planets. From Caladan, which is like a, could be like a European, like just very watery, Northern European sort of world, and Dune itself, Arrakis, just an absolutely arid, brutal landscape full of nothing but sand. I mean, and even going to Gidi Prime, where the Harkonnens are, and it's just like a giant city world that's just it's brutal and sterile and just and ugly. There's I mean it's just visually speaking and everything the nothing like everything looks practical even though there's plenty of CG in it.
Mhm.
And when it comes time for there to be CG heavy action parts, that's not distracting either. You
No.
absolutely believe that those giant ships are there.
Yeah.
And when they blow up, you believe that a gigantic ship that's bigger than any ship you've ever seen in your life just blew up. Or when the ornithopters are flying around, they're flitting around like dragonflies. Or how to me the best visual effect is that damn sandworm, that gigantic sandworm. Uh, it's
Yeah.
you can almost feel its presence, and that also goes hand in hand with the outstanding sound design that went into this movie. I know you said what your it was your surround sound. Just when in the theater, in the Dolby theater, you could feel. Obviously, you can feel everything 'cause that's the point of it. But there's a deep bass, a deep hum that when the sandworm's moving, that you feel before you hear, and it translates all that. There's very deliberate sound design in here to immerse you in this movie, and it's super effective. It's extremely effective.
Yep.
But I think, and even visually speaking, like even the costumes, all the costume design, the interior set design, everything is it's just all cohesive. You believe everything you see, you believe it's a real thing, and that's a hell of a thing to accomplish with any sci-fi. To actually make you feel like this is a real place that I can actually visit. And, there are many movies that I really like, and I still am like, this isn't a real place, but I could feel like this was real.
Yeah.
But I again, with the as far as sound goes, like that soundtrack though.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's I'm I'm listening to the sound, and it's again the sound design of not just the the background music, the background sounds. The Foley artists are killing it, but the score just seems hella appropriate all the way around.
Yeah.
there are bagpipes in this soundtrack. Eh, Do, how? Yeah, I just wonder how. How do you do? How do you do? There was throat singing. Remember the starter car? They do throat singing,
Yeah.
and throat talking, and
Yeah.
and it just like even just listening to the different languages that are being spoken and everything. I mean, just like I've again believed what I'm seeing. It's there's a realism to this that shouldn't be possible in a world where there's giant sandworms and and the Baron Harkonnen who's floating around like a gigantic spider floating around. It's crazy work.
Yeah. There are some Scottish people out there right now that their hearts are absolutely warmed to know that the bagpipes somehow
Survive 10,000 years in
survived
the future.
10,000 years into the future.
um, let's talk about some performances. Who was your MVP as far as acting is concerned?
Oof. Mm.
I know it's hard choice, right?
Oh, that's a tough one. I liked every God.
Yeah, no, it's fair to say like I didn't feel like there was a bad performance. I honestly didn't. Um, we
The guy who played the
You talking about that played Paul? Um,
main. Oh man, his
it's
I just can't believe the name just slipped my
Timothy
mind. The guy who
Chalamet.
plays
Yeah.
Aquaman.
Oh yeah,
Um,
Jason Momoa.
what's his
As
name?
he played Jason Momoa plays Duncan Idaho, and he's
Oh, the guy.
yeah Jason Momoa. So he was awesome.
Oh yeah, Jason Momoa. Like Jason Momoa, great acting. Like the whole like his guardian type thing, and it's just like I completely. Honestly, I was so engrossed in the movie, I forgot about. Oh, let's not talk about that. That's kind of spoilery.
No, you can talk about.
But
We're talking spoilers now. It's fine.
oh, I completely forgot about the part of the movie where he had that dream he was gonna die, but then they clearly showed the hallway with the bodies on. I was like, oh, this is where he's about to die.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think there was questions before like, can he do? Does he got the chops? Hell yeah, Jason Momoa absolutely killed it as
Yeah,
Duncan Idaho. I thought Oscar Isaac playing the Duke Leto was excellent, and I mean just excellent. Rebecca Ferguson who played Lady Jessica, she was awesome. Like there
who's the
was
guy? Who's the guy who played the Baron?
that's Stellan Skarsgård, who you would know him. He played Doctor Selvig in the Marvel movies. You know,
Yeah, he made my skin crawl, man.
he should. He's supposed to make your skin crawl. That's the thing is, hell, Dave Batista was excellently brutal as Raban.
Yeah,
Uh, you had, of course, Timothy Chalamet uh, was Paul. He was awesome. Like the part where he really sold me was the pain box part.
yeah,
That part where he was just like shaking and then he looks up and he looks
yeah,
that woman in the face and I was like, I like you can see the face of a killer there. Like I'm like, man, this kid is the truth. I came out of this movie
yeah,
thinking this guy right here is the truth. Um,
yeah. That,
you even had playing Gurney Halleck. You had Josh Brolin, excellent
yep,
as Gurney, and you had I'm not going to get their names right, so I'm just going to say, but Liet Kynes, the Fremen woman, was
yeah.
she was bad. How about Javier Bardem as Stilgar, as the leader of
Oh
the
yeah,
Fremen? I mean, hell, she didn't have a whole lot of play, but Zendaya was excellent
yeah.
as Chani. Hell, even
Like it was
I've
kind
got
of surprising to see how good her performance was. I'm not saying I never thought that Zendaya was not a good actress. It's just I didn't think she had that in her. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
I mean, she was most of the time. It's not. It's a dream version of her, but even still, just like, just as I was thinking about, I was like, man, the camera loved her, absolutely. Every time she was on the screen, just mesmerizing. Um,
Yep.
I also I don't know the actor's name, but the guy that played Jamis, who Paul fought at the very end of the movie, and to see him, like, there's so much going on here. We see him before we see him, because Paul is sort of having visions of alternate universes. He's literally doing the Loki on this thing, where he's not seeing the future, so to speak. He's seeing possible futures.
Yeah.
That's where his power is. He's ascending, and he sees an alternate future where he and Jamis are friends, where Jamis teaches him the ways of the Fremen, and
Yep.
then he has to kill this same guy. And
Yep.
I was just like, man, an amazing way to sort of explain what exactly Paul is doing, in terms of his prescience, and a kind of a heartbreaking scene, to be honest. There's a lot of
Yeah.
that going on here.
Yeah. He wanted to keep him alive, but he wasn't going to stop until he was dead, and it was
Exactly.
just man, that movie. Oh man,
And
I've really enjoyed the movie.
I,
The you know.
I
Oh,
did
wait, what were
want
you about
to
to
I
say?
did want to call out something, because with something we haven't said yet. We've talked about every aspect of this movie, including the bad guys, the good guys, and everything. We haven't talked about the Fremen, um,
Mhm.
or the Sardaukar. We can talk about both of them because they got kind of go hand in hand. The Fremen, the Sardaukar are terrifying. They are terrifying warriors.
Man,
You
f-
s- you s-
the
you saw how they absolutely murdered all of the Atreides people who were kicking the shit out of the Harkonnens, right? And they
yeah,
came up and a few of them murdered all of them, right? And you're like, these
yeah.
guys are badass. And then I'm watching. I'm like, y'all, you think these guys are bad? Okay, wait till you see some Fremen. And I'm telling you, there's a scene that really kind of, I already knew this, but it kind of reinforced to me, like, yeah, these are some badass people. And the scene is this: when they were going to, Duncan took Paul and Jessica to see Liet Kynes, and there were five Fremen with them, right? Five
Mhm.
of them. They were making spice coffee, and then like 20 or 25 Sardaukar dropped down there, and you saw that those Fremen disappeared, right?
Yeah.
And then when you next thing you saw was five Fremen jumping up out of the sand and going ham. And I'm just like, these are the most badass warriors in the universe, supposedly, and the Fremen are murdering them left and right.
Yep.
And I'm like, they're the truth, you know. Know for sure, because you saw how easy Duncan was going. He was putting Sardaukar on the ground. Remember those first few that came through, and he killed
Yeah.
like 8 of them.
Yeah.
And remember, Duncan said the first time he fought a Fremen, he almost died.
Yeah.
One Fremen almost killed him, and he killed like 8 Sardaukar on his own. That's what I'm talking
Eh,
about. Those guys are the truth. When we get to part two, which we're getting, by the way, they have greenlit part two as of today. They're gonna be the truth. I'm telling you that
And that
that
just shows you how much of a badass Paul is, because he fought one of the best ones.
Yeah, no, he put Jamis on the ground. He put Jamis, but that's because Paul's trained. Paul is trained by Gurney and by Duncan, Idaho, right?
Hmm.
And he's been trained by his mother, which they didn't really go into. Do you think the only thing he learned was that voice? It's not the only thing he learned from her.
His mom's dangerous now. His mom's not a
Yeah,
damsel in distress.
and we didn't say much about the Benny Gesserit either, but just be assured. You remember remember, once again, Stilgar. Think about this. If you want to know the badass scale, think about this. Stilgar is a leader of a siege, and he's a
Hmm.
leader because he can kill anyone who challenges him. Right? That's
Hmm.
how that's so he's a badass, and anyone who wants to challenge him has to kill him if they want to be in charge. Okay, so that means he can beat, generally speaking, beat most other Fremen in a knife fight. And
Yeah.
Jessica disarmed his ass in no time.
Yep.
That's what I'm saying. Like, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, now this actually sort of goes into what I was going to talk about. How faithful is this thing to the book? It's damn faithful. I can tell that Denis Villeneuve said in interviews that this was his jam when he was at like 13, and he was he was hooked. And I was like, I can see it. This is as much of a love letter to this story as you can get. It is more faithful than the '84 one. Uh, it's more ambitious than the sci-fi miniseries, and it gets an awful lot right. It got so much right that I only noticed two things that weren't the same from the book. And by the same, and most of the time, being slavishly devoted to the book is a bad thing. But in this case, he pulled it off.
Yeah.
So this is by far and away the better version of Dune. Better than the other two, which I like both the previous versions, by the way, but better than those by far. This is the standard that for this story, and I doubt Dune will ever get adapted better for another 30 or 40 years. Just my opinion. Um, I do wonder though, and this maybe you can speak to this, if you are not aware of the story, can you get into it? Can you, if you don't know the story like I do, can you get into it? Does it require too much patience? Are people just, do people just not have the patience or the stomach, or maybe, dare I say, the desire to think at such a movie in order to get into this kind of story?
I'm gonna say this. I will say I don't think so. I feel like this movie is targeted towards a specific kind of fan. And a lot of people who like sci-fi, they're not really into it to just like you said, the little pew pew or all that stuff. You can watch superhero movies for that. You know what I mean? They have Guardians of the Galaxy sci-fi if you want to do that. I feel like this movie is a great. I feel like most people who will watch it will enjoy the movie. I feel like the only people who will not watch this will not enjoy watching this movie are people that are not fans of the genre. You know what I mean? They're not like sci-fi fans. They're just watching the movie because somebody they know wants to watch it, and they just like, oh, okay, I'll watch it too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would like to think, I hope that this is the sort of movie that kind of raises the bar, sets raises the standard for, as a fan, how I don't want to say educate, but maybe elevate people's expectations, and also elevates their minds as far as what sci-fi can really be. This is definitely, in my mind, this is an artist, an artist, trying for high art here. I know, again, there's a lot of lasers and fighting and stuff, but this seems to be an attempt at high art, at high cinema, but for the masses. And maybe I'm wrong, but I really hope it's true. And um, it's, again, highly recommended. I highly recommend it to people to just give it a chance, and understand, that the pacing and all, everything's very deliberate in this thing. They're definitely building to a story. It doesn't, unfortunately, end on something. I don't want to say a cliffhanger, but it ends in like a place where you're just like, man, I wanted more of this story. You didn't finish it all up, and I get it. There's a second part coming, and so keeping that
You
in
know,
mind.
but I feel like that's a good thing because I feel like sometimes where some of these movies who have clearly part twos that well, I mean, won't say clearly, but they have a second part to it. It feels like the movie ended and they're just making a sequel. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It feels like there was a resolution. This movie clearly ended where you're like, okay, I'm excited for the next part. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
and
this
that's a good thing in my
this
opinion.
is. I think you definitely ought to be, because just if you don't know the rest of the story, the if you thought the first one was like there's a lot of stuff going on, there's so much more going on in this, and it becomes a lot more interesting, say so, if you will, uh, as all the chessboard, so to speak, starts to clear up a little bit, and who are the kings and who are the pawns, and where it's all leading towards a it's building, the pressure's building up, it's all building to a head, and something's got to give, and Paul's got to embrace his destiny. And it's going to be a fun ride. So I don't know. Again, just a real triumph here. I really love this movie. Definitely going to see it a few more times. It's on HBO Max until I believe November 20. I want to say the 24th. I could be wrong about that, but until late November. So definitely go check it out there if you're not comfortable going to the theater. If you are, go to the theater because you will not regret this cinematic experience. So I think that's all of our thoughts on Dune, 2021 from Denis Villeneuve, WB Legendary Pictures, and I don't know. Did you guys see this movie? What did you think about it? And what did you think about our review? Maybe it helped you understand, or maybe it got you interested to go see the movie. Whatever it is, let us know down in the comments. Or, of course, you can always hit us up, supernotfunnyshow@gmail.com or at supernotfunnys1 on Twitter. And, of course, you can always hit up our good friend Lottie at.
You can always find me at my Instagram, which is Anukinihun, ANUKINIHUN. Yeah, again, it's ANUKINIHUN. Constantly upload videos, like short videos and pictures of stuff that I'm working on. And of course, you can always find me on my YouTube channel, which is Kinihun25. Starting to do a little bit of live streams now. So if you ever have time and you're on YouTube and bored, catch the live stream. I usually stream. I try to stream at least 2 times a week. So if you're ever there and you see the stream, just hop on, leave a like, and join the ride with me.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Lottie, for joining me. Thanks all you guys for joining us on this Super Not Funny Show reviews. Come back next time. We're going to be reviewing even more things in the future. Until then, I have been Mo De Pupe, your resident fabricant and commenter extraordinaire on all things pop culture, joined by the anime expert, video game designer, and lover of all things superhero, my good friend Lottie. We'll catch you guys on the other side of the thread. Peace.
Peace.